Good evening. It was the shock to beat all shocks. Last Friday we woke up to the news that the UK had voted to leave the EU. But 1 week on, where are we now? What does the future hold and what could the decision mean for you? That's what we're discussing this week with my guests. James Wright, who's a Liberal Democrat City Councillor and former parliamentary candidate. Also with us, the UKIP MEP Stuart Agnew and Dr Nick Wright, who teaches politics at University College London and is also a senior researcher at the UEA. So gentlemen, what tipped it? Let's start with James Wright. What do you think made up people's minds?
I think by and large, from a lot of the people that we were talking to, it was domestic issues, actually more so that's in Europe, particularly for those who were voting out. I think people were frustrated, perhaps with the austerity programme as it's implemented, and not seeing a bright future for themselves, and that's manifested itself in this particular vote for a leave, in order to try and fix some of the domestic issues.
Stuart Agnew, do you agree? Was it domestic issues that tipped it over for people?
I would have said that for many people in Norfolk, particularly on the extreme east and west of the county, it was immigration, not being able to work on the land because European gang masters control all of that and they only want to employ their own, which is understandable. And also, a lot of what you heard were fed up with being bossed about by Brussels, particularly people of my age and a little bit younger, who have seen this project come through from what we thought we voted for all those years ago.
And there was a difference, Nick Wright, wasn't there, between ages and who voted for what?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there was the general, and perhaps unsurprisingly, there was a split. The younger you were, the more likely you were to vote for Remain. But I don't think it was just being annoyed with Brussels bureaucrats. I think this was about sending a very clear message to domestic political elites as we have had enough. There's a lot of people, okay, the final result was quite close, but there are a lot of people who are basically saying, you've forgotten us for long enough, and this is the consequences of that. And any party that does not take that on board is going to have very serious problems.
And we've seen a lot of people on social media this week saying it was a protest vote. Does that worry you?
Hugely. I mean, something of this magnitude. I mean, I can accept the fact that people might make a protest vote in a national election. You know, we then know,
or a by-election.
But to do it something where there's no do-overs. We can't step back from this once we've triggered that Article 50. So I think, and you know, we've heard of people who say they regret the fact that they voted Leave. And some people who say they now regret the fact they voted Remain.
But it has been brewing, hasn't it? Ever since my party started, every time there's an election, we get more and more votes. So it isn't just a one-off. There's been a dissatisfaction with what's happening, and it has been coming up to the boil.
But I mean, there is a seismic shift though in terms of the percentage of voters that had been voting UKIP, who then suddenly said, actually, we are.
So
we want to.
Are you
leave.
saying, Stuart, it wasn't a protest vote then?
There will have been an element of protest in it, of course, and this is always the problem with a referendum. The people don't vote really on the issues, and and they can be complicated issues too. And I think there might have been an enormous sympathy vote for Joe Cox. In fact, I thought that would lose us the referendum because I put myself in the mindset of a typical voter who was fed up with being bombarded from facts and there and facts from there, but they knew how to support a bereaved family.
I think I just come into that. I think to call it a protest vote, it risks dismissing it, and it risks assuming that the people who voted didn't know what they were voting on. And yes, there might have been sort of issues around actually understanding what was going on here. But I think this was a very clear rejection by a significant proportion of the population. So to dismiss it as a protest vote is to not do it justice.
OK, well, let's take a look at how the county voted. We know there was a marked difference between the vote in Norwich and in Norfolk. As you can see, this breakdown of how the county voted, it did reflect the national picture. Norwich voted firmly to remain, with 56% of people in the city wanting to stay in. The most Eurosceptic area of Norfolk was Great Yarmouth. That voted 72 to 28% to leave. And the county as a whole voted to leave, with 59% of voters in Norfolk wanting to get out. Well, UKIP's Steve Emmons, who stood as a parliamentary candidate in Norwich South in the last election, spoke to Neil Perry on News Extra on Tuesday night about his experience of canvassing in the city.
When we were canvassing the estates in the North Norwich, we weren't finding Remain. We were going down these big estates and we were knocking them, and we were forming teams, and we were going that road. And we were finding like 5 Remains, and we'd knocked 100 doors each. So all of a sudden, I'm thinking...
Was that what you expected, though?
No, not at all. But Project Fear wasn't working with these people. I mean, Cameron had expended all his capital, hadn't he?
Steve Emmons of UKIP there. Was that your experience, that there was a lot of people on the council estates who were wanting to leave?
For those council estates we went to, yes. In my own ward of Eton, it was roughly 50-50 in terms of those who wanted to leave and those who wanted to remain. Of course, the polar opposite is the areas of Norwich, the Golden Triangle, anywhere there was a terrace street, basically, where it's overwhelmingly remain. I think in one part of Town Close ward, it was 83% to 17 when we looked at the data on the night from the box counts that we got. So overwhelmingly wanted to remain in those areas. So a big difference across the city, actually.
Does it mean we're sort of divided more as a society now? I know people have been saying that since the vote.
I mean, I think we've been divided for a while. I think this is simply, showing us the reality. The political establishment has been trying to paper over the cracks with varying degrees of success, but this has been going on for the best part of 30 years. We've seen a huge shift in our economic focus, our political focus of, we're talking about sort of neoliberal economic system, etc. This is, I think it would be very interesting if we'd had a proportional system and UKIP had received seats in proportion to the number of votes they received last year in the general election. We might not have seen this, if you like, this swelling of rejection of the political establishment this year. But this is what we've got. This is the way politics is playing out now.
And of course, Norwich is a university town, and we saw across the country that university towns were voting to remain in the EU. It was quite interesting, wasn't it? Oxford, Cambridge, Norwich, Bristol, and a number of
London,
others.
yes.
I mean, the interesting thing on, of course, the whole university town thing is, of course, the students had all gone home. So it may well be a university town, but the students weren't here to vote. They were
Well,
back.
yeah, I'd acknowledge that, but it's the general
It's a
mindset. Yeah.
There's
Okay.
also the fact that in terms of turnout, the younger vote, although very vocal, still I think it was in the low 40s in terms of total turnout over the country, and that was very significant.
Yeah, okay. Well, many in the city who voted to remain have spoken of their dismay at the overall result. Gail Harris is with the Labour Party and the Deputy Leader of Norwich City Council.
It's absolutely devastating. I think it's devastating for the country. I mean, we've got the economy, all the things that we've benefit from the European Union, human rights, workers' rights, the blue flag beaches, so many good things. And, people can always find negative things, but the only way to reform things is from within.
Gail Harris talking there. She's complaining that the Leave campaign
I've
was
heard
negative.
this sort of thing before. The assumption here is we in this country could never do anything good, and yet we were one of the first to give women the vote. We were one of the first to get into the abolition of slavery. We are capable of doing good things. We don't need the EU to tell us how to do it.
Perhaps, but what about that £350 million that's been promised? I'd be very interested to see if any of that actually makes it to the NHS.
I will accept, when I saw that written on that lorry, why on earth have they done that? Because that'll be picked
but the
apart.
problem
So
is
we
the
should be
promise-
clear, this is the NHS, this is during the campaign. There was a promise that the £350 million a week would
it
come
wasn't
back
quite
into
like
the
that,
NHS.
but there was an inference.
There was
wasn't
an
there?
inference.
I think it was much stronger than an inference. I think a lot of people said this is one of the reasons I voted. That's a very clear, easy to remember figure.
Yeah.
Boris stood in front of that bus, made this plane across the country, and if he does not, assuming he's the next Prime Minister, if he does not deliver on that, there's going to be 17 million very, very angry people out there.
And a lot of people feeling let down because they didn't feel the campaign to leave was honest.
Well, you could say that about the campaign for Remain, for this business about there would be genocide, there was going to be this revenge budget, which isn't going to happen. All sorts of ghastly things would descend upon this country, and they're all admitting now that isn't going to happen.
Experts, of course, which we learned during the campaign we weren't to trust, but experts predicted that the stock market would be in turmoil, and as with the pound, and of course that has come true. And I'm someone who is still passionately pro remaining in the European Union, despite having lost this particular battle. And I think that I am concerned. We have had 70 years of peace in Europe, peace with our countries that in the last century we would be fighting wars with, and I'm really concerned that we don't go down that route again.
Let's pick up on the financial aspect, because people are worried about that and worried about their pensions.
The pound has weakened, but not enormously, which certainly helps exporters, without a doubt.
But it doesn't help me if I'm going to France this year or on holiday. My money's going to be worth less, isn't it?
Yes, that's true. That is true.
And it was called Project Fear, but it happened.
Well, it hasn't collapsed. It's gone down a bit.
I think
and it's gone down to where it was about 5 years ago.
Neither side covered themselves in any glory
I agree.
at all
I mean,
in this
I
campaign.
quite agree. Yeah.
Some of the claims, particularly on the Leave side, were more Project Fantasy than Project Fear, and on the Remain side, I mean, there was very little attempt to play up the positives about our membership. And if you put that on top of 30 years of drip, drip, drip anti-Europeanism in the press, no government of either side actually standing up and saying, well, hang on a minute, this is what we get from the European Union, the result is not at all surprising.
Do you think people are losing trust in the political classes now? After this? What do you think, James Wright?
I think they have done over a number of years, and I think this is what this result tells us. And coming back to what I was saying earlier, this is about, to a certain extent, a failing of domestic policy to make sure that communities across the country are adequately supported, whether that be through education, for job opportunities, infrastructure investment. So,
Okay.
Well, I mean, 52% of the population have voted for the frontline policy of a party that has less than 1/6 of 1% representation in the House of Commons.
Quite remarkable.
And
So there's something wrong there, isn't there? And even that's a little bit, perhaps,
Actually,
big.
it's 37% because it's 52% of the people who turned out. But
all right.
Okay, all right,
But I think
gentlemen, thank you.
48% of the people who turned out voted for a party for whom this is our frontline policy. We've only got 8 MPs. So,
All right, gentlemen, thank you. That's all we've got time for. We will be back after the break talking more about the EU referendum decision, what it means for Norfolk and what the future may hold. Join us then. Welcome back. Tonight we're talking about the EU referendum and what the future could hold. On the panel this evening, James Wright, Liberal Democrat councillor. Also with us, UKIP MEP Stuart Agnew and Dr Nick Wright, who teaches politics at University College London. Well, we know the overall vote was close. 52% voted to leave and 48% to remain. And after that result, we spoke to Norwich North MP Chloe Smith to get her reaction.
My vote is worth the same as everyone else in this referendum, which I've been saying to constituents throughout. Yes, personally I had voted Remain, and I believe that would have been the best option. But nonetheless, this is a referendum. The result stands, and we need to come together as a country and now do what is best for Britain. That is going to mean quite a lot of hard work ahead, but it's also going to mean a lot of respect for each other and other people's views, and that's incredibly important at this point.
Chloe Smith there. And it is a concern this week, Stuart Agnew. We've seen an increase in hate crime in the UK already. And I wonder, has this result given the very, very right wing of society almost licence to act and behave badly?
No, there's no excuse for that sort of behaviour. It's disgusting, and I hope the people are punished properly.
How can we come together after this? I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, James Wright, when there are so many people at polar opposite ends of the spectrum?
I think, what we need is clear leadership nationally on bringing this together. And as Stuart says, when it comes to things like the hate crime and racist incidents, they need to be called out, punished fully. But how we get to a point of healing, it's going to take some years actually, because we are polarised over this.
It requires every party leader to step up and start being a bit more emollient, including the UKIP leader who, no disrespect to it, but he didn't cover himself with glory at the European Parliament this week or with that poster. I think this is a very serious moment for our politics. There's a very, very clear divide in the country. Yes, the Leave campaign won. That's the result. We have to stick with it. But a large number of people voted against that, so you need to find a way of bringing everyone together.
Has the Leave campaign been too divisive, do you think, Stuart Agnew?
Well, the whole thing has been divisive, hasn't it?
But pitting people against one another and perhaps Nigel Farage not handling himself in the best possible way.
He's the one who gets personally vilified more than anybody else, and he doesn't actually attack other individuals, to be fair to him. And in the Parliament, he never interrupts other people, but he's always being heckled and harangued himself. And he's known as a divisive character, but it is a divisive issue, and we've just seen it split the country pretty well down the middle. And I've noticed he tends to go perhaps that extra little bit, and then other people quickly come in behind to where he was beforehand. That's what seems to be the way it's going.
Okay. Well, let's talk about what might happen next. And there's been much talk about a timetable for exit. Some European leaders have suggested the UK should leave as soon as possible. But Boris Johnson, speaking just after the result, thinks we can take our time.
Voting to leave the EU, it is vital to stress that there is now no need for haste. And indeed, as the Prime Minister has just said, nothing will change over the short term, except that work will have to begin on how to give effect to the will of the people and to extricate this country from the supranational system. And as the Prime Minister has rightly said, there is no need to invoke Article 50. We cannot turn our backs on Europe. We are part of Europe. Our children and our grandchildren will continue to have a wonderful future as Europeans travelling to the continent, understanding the languages and cultures that make up our common European civilization.
Boris Johnson there. So I have to ask you, Stuart Agnew, how's it going to happen? What do you think we need to do now?
I think the timing of invoking Article 50 is actually critical. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about that. Jumping in and doing it now, I think, is too hasty. We do need to have some reflection within the country and then have some preliminary talks. On the other hand, if it's allowed to drift and drift and drift, then people will think, well, we haven't really voted to come out at all. I have set a deadline of November the 5th, where we remember the gunpowder plot to try and destroy the sovereignty of the House of Commons, and I would like to see that as the day when we invoke Article 50. I think that would be about right, but I'd be interested to hear what you say.
And that's our official notice to leave. What do you make of it?
I think, well, there is no haste, but we do have to do it as soon as possible. But those two aren't necessarily contradictory. The point is, we need to take some time to actually work out what our strategy is, what exactly is the model of relationship we want to have. But at the same time, there are 27 other member states involved in this, and they are not going to wait for us. The risk of leaving it too long is whenever we invoke it, have they already coalesced around a particular position? Have they already made up their mind about what they're willing to negotiate with us? So, we are not the only people involved in this, and we have to be very wary. We need goodwill amongst our soon-to-be ex-EU partners in order to get a good deal here. The longer we leave it, the more likely we lose the initiative.
And there's been a lot of criticism for there not really being a plan, James Wright. I mean, neither side really seemed to have a plan for what they were going to do.
Well, I think the Remain plan was perhaps slightly easier to have insofar as it would be business as usual. The Leave plans Leave side clearly don't seem to have a plan. I think in terms of the timing, we'll have a new Conservative Party leader in hopefully by the 9th of September, so that will perhaps be the earliest date that it could be. And my own party leader was in Brussels this week talking to Liberal Prime Ministers and other members of the what's known as the ALDE group in Brussels, sort of talk about what the way forward may well be, and I think that's where we need some strong leadership across all the parties.
And going on from that, there's another thing. There could well be a general election this autumn. Now, I believe that the outgoing Prime Minister should trigger the Article 50 before a general election, and we then fight the general election on A, how are we going to negotiate, and B, what will this country look like, the different policies, the menus for running this country from the different parties as an independent country. But I think the triggering would have to come first. That's just my view.
I was just going to say this. I mean, I think the important thing to know is that the process at administrative and bureaucratic level has already begun. About sort of a minister within the Cabinet Office who's been appointed to start preparing all of this. So hopefully by the time the new Prime Minister is in place, there will be some options there. But we cannot leave this indefinitely.
And once we trigger, presumably, that's it. Once the 2 years are up, we get to leave whether the deals are done or not.
Yeah, there's a guillotine at that point.
I mean, can I just come back on a point that Stuart made there? What I'd personally like to see, if there is going to be an autumn general election, is that the new Prime Minister after the election triggers. My own party will be going into the next general election, restating our policy, which we've had for a number of years, which is we think this country is better off being in the European Union. So clearly,
is that going to win the votes, do you think, to campaign to Remain if you're the main party?
We've got 11,000 new members since Friday morning, so there's 11,000 people there who clearly support the stance that
is it a vote winner, do you think?
I think it is amongst people who are pro being European and pro having that outward-looking internationalist approach to life.
And what happens? That's where we would strongly disagree on this, though, isn't it? Because it was this government that called this referendum, The people have said we want to leave, and it is up to them to trigger that Article 50 before they go back to the country. So we disagree.
So what happens if we have a general election and all the pro-Remain parties do best and they win? What happens then? Do we still leave?
Well, if Article 50 hasn't been triggered, then you know,
which is why I'm worried. You see.
Yeah.
It's anybody's guess. Is that what we're saying?
Well, I mean, if Article 50 hasn't been triggered, we carry on being members. And if we have a government that refuses to do it, then and that's been elected, then
democratic
there you go.
mandate.
Exactly.
Okay.
So,
well, let's hear from someone else who has an interesting view. One of the concerns voiced by many is that uncertainty that lies ahead. And Green Party councillor in Norwich, Martin Schmierer, thinks despite the vote, we won't end up leaving the EU at all.
Well, the cynic in me thinks that we're basically going to spend the next 2 years trying to negotiate our way back in, because whatever David Cameron says, this is going to be a period of considerable flux. The kaleidoscope of European politics as a whole has been very much shaken. We'll have to wait and see how the pieces settle.
Martin Schmierer there. So could we end up spending the next 2 years negotiating our way back in? Could it happen?
we could spend the next 10 years negotiating our way back in. I think the problem is momentum starts to build, particularly on the other side of the channel amongst our EU partners. Who want some certainty. They're very sad that we're going, but they want to know, well, what happens next. And so to that extent, it starts to be something out of our control.
Well, the country has voted to leave, and the Green Party is split. Campaigning alongside me in Gentleman's Walk in Norwich were people called the Green Leaves. Very clever name.
What about this deal, though? What happens is, and Angela Merkel has said this week, that we're not going to get free trade if we don't accept freedom of movement. And surely that would be a failure of UKIP and a failure of the referendum.
My feeling on this single market is that it's yesterday's dream. It was great when they could erect very high tariffs against other countries, but the WTO has smashed them all down now to the extent that China sells 350
But if we have to accept
billion
freedom
pounds
of
worth of goods into
movement
it.
to get free trade with Europe, what will have been the point of having a referendum?
She has a problem with the car workers in Germany, and they're going to want to continue to sell those cars here. And this is where reality starts to come in. There may be politicians out there wanting revenge, but there are 5.5 million jobs in the European Union dependent on us buying their goods.
I don't think. I mean, I think there'd be very few people looking for revenge. I think the point is what you've got to understand is the whilst there is an interest in in developing a strong relationship with the United Kingdom, there's a higher level of interest which is looking after the European Union, keeping the single market functioning, and ensuring that the domestic interests of the other 27 member states are met. And that makes it very complicated. That's why this whole process is going to get very complicated, even with goodwill on both sides.
But if a lot of people left with concerns about immigration, and if that is not controlled, then there'll be a riot. Surely people will be really angry.
Well, there are three main elements to the Brexit. One is the contributions, the other is the immigration, and the other is the loss of sovereignty. Now, they're starting to talk about a Norway Plus, which doesn't fill me with confidence. Yes, it deals with the sovereignty side of it, the courts and the laws, but it means free movement of people, which this country doesn't want, and it also means actually quite hefty contributions.
And fax diplomacy at the end of it. You still have to sign up to a lot of the regulation that is developed in Brussels, but you're not in the room when it's being agreed.
We could talk about this all week, and I'm sure we will continue, but that is all we've got time for this evening. If you want to get in touch, you can contact us via the Mustard TV Facebook page, or we're on Twitter @MustardThisWeek. Good night.